Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Clo Bare Money Podcast. Wait, that's not the name of this podcast. The Money Bear Podcast, where your host, me, Chloe Daniels, also known as Clo Bare Money Coach, will talk to you about pretty much all things related to money and maybe even some things that aren't related to money. But I don't know, everything's kind of related to money, so it all works out. Um, Before we dive into today's episodes, I kind of think I want to start introducing something a little bit new. First, I just want to tell you guys about my day and what's been going on in my life because I feel like I love talking about myself. So why wouldn't I? I'll use this as like my therapy segment where I'm like working through what I'm going through right now in this segment. And then we'll dive into the episode afterwards. But I also want to give like a money tip in each episode because this is a money podcast and I want to make sure you guys are getting the most out of listening to this. So if you guys are cool with that, I'm cool with that. And that's what we're going to be doing. And I'm really excited to get going. So, what's been going in my life lately? Things have been absolutely crazy for the last 2 months. I feel like it's just been a total blur. I spent a month in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'll be honest, even though I ended up hanging out with a lot of friends and getting some good hiking in and some good kayaking in, I didn't really feel like I belonged there. And I wanted to because I really thought I wanted to move to Arizona, but it didn't feel right. And so that kind of was weird for me because I left this road trip. For those of you guys who don't know, I'm on a digital nomad who's kind of just like traveling around with my dog to figure out where I want to live. And I left for this road trip really thinking that I would end up in Arizona, but I'm not entirely sure that that's actually what's going to happen. And so now I feel more confused than when I left for this road trip. Um, but I was in Scottsdale for like the entire month of June. And then I spent a little bit of time up in Page, Arizona with my dad. And then after Page, Arizona, I headed down to Palm Springs. And Palm Springs is really where things started to take a turn. I got COVID. And while I also had COVID, I also had my Instagram account taken down, not once, but twice in the course of 24 hours. When that happens, my business is really run off of Instagram. And I'm better now where I'm at the point where I have an email list. I've got other platforms that I've got larger followings on. But Instagram is really my bread and butter. It's where I have the strongest community. So every time Instagram takes down my account, it's just like 24 hours of panic because what happens is they don't let you even submit an appeal to get your account back until it's been down for at least 24 hours, which is total BS in my opinion. I don't know how my account keeps getting taken down while all these scammer accounts get to live on freely forever. So it's one of those things where it makes me sad that that has such a huge impact on my mental health, but it does. And it's something that like tore me up to the point where I think it's probably why I got COVID because I was so stressed out. And I don't know about you guys, but when I get stressed out, I get stress poops. You didn't know this is what you were going to get on today's podcast, but it is. But when I'm stressed out, I get stress poops. And so I had like diarrhea for like 48 hours and longer because it ended up staying down for longer than 48 hours. And then I got hit with COVID. So I feel like because I was already stressed out, that's what resulted in me finally getting COVID because I haven't had it since the pandemic started. But man, COVID really took me out on my ass. And I really didn't get to see anything in Palm Springs or really enjoy Palm Springs because I was sick the entire time that I was there. But then I made my way to San Diego. Driving while sick is something I 1,000,000% would not recommend to anybody. But recovering from COVID in San Diego has been wonderful. And I will say, San Diego is making me think that when I do finally decide to settle down somewhere, I might end up moving here because I love it. And I have spent so much time telling myself that you can't move to California because it's too expensive and it's not practical and it's not something that, makes sense. And what I've realized is like, screw that. Like, why does every decision I make have to make sense? Why does it have to be super practical? Why does everything I do have to be practical? And it doesn't. People have kids all the time, and kids technically aren't very practical. They're expensive, they're a drain. Of course, they bring you so much happiness, but like they're not practical. Buying a house is not always practical. Doing like, there's so many things that we do that are not practical. And what I'm realizing with the help of my spiritual coach is practicality sometimes gets in the way of my happiness. In fact, for me being practical gets in the way of my happiness far too often. And I'm trying to work on that because here I am living my dream life, but not fully able to grasp it and not fully able to feel it because I'm being too practical like 90% of the time. So that's going to be one of my growth edges for the foreseeable future. I have some like task lists of homework that are really just things to help me find more joy in my life because I feel like for the last 10 years, I've been so focused on becoming who I am now that now I'm like, okay, I've become the person I've always wanted to be, but now I really want to learn how to enjoy this. So that's what I'm working on right now, guys. I don't know if you saw on Instagram or anything along those lines, but I also had a lovely little retreat that I organized this last weekend, which you guys are listening to this a few weeks after. But as of this recording last weekend, I had organized a little like finance creators getaway with some of my closest finance creator friends, like Mark from Better Wallets, Ellie and the Money Coach, She Wolf of Wall Street, and Money Honey Rachel. We all got together. There were a couple other people who were invited but couldn't make it, unfortunately. But it was so nice to have this small group get together because hanging out with other finance creators is like the medicine I need to like continue to do what I do. And it was so nice because they all felt the same way. It's just so good to connect and really understand the unique challenges that we are all going through as, you know, sort of Instagram influencers. To me, like an influencer is somebody who doesn't have a business and only gets paid for brand promotion. So I wouldn't consider us influencers. I would consider us more creators. We create content, we create education. Yes, we do some influencing, but we all have businesses. But it really filled my cup. It was just so nice to be surrounded by people who understand me and I understand and are at the same place that I'm at or, you know, a step above me. And that was really cool. So that's what else I've been doing this weekend, or I guess lately. But because I was sick for honestly, before I had COVID, I was sick like for a week or 2 weeks in Scottsdale. And then I was recovered for a week and then I got COVID. I feel like I've been sick for the last month. And then I had that retreat and now I'm like, okay, time to get back in the swing of things. So I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but I'm also feeling excited because work, i.e., Clo Bare Money Coach, and everything that goes into this business is what I love to do the most, which is problematic in some ways, but it really is where I find my flow, my zone of genius. So I'm excited to get back into it and really dedicate more time to content creation and educating you guys. So I hope you enjoyed hearing that update on my life. I'm going to try to do that at the beginning of every episode so you guys can get to know me a little bit more. And, you know, I also just want to like connect with all of you. So I hope you found that entertaining and enjoyable, I guess. But it was helpful for me. I am the kind of person who like needs to talk things out. And being somebody who is on the road full time, it can get lonely. So using this as a way to kind of air out my thoughts is what I'm going to keep doing. So hope you guys are ready to buckle in for that. But anyway, so today's money tip that we're going to cover is I bonds. So I just did a post today about I bonds because everyone is talking about I bonds. You've got 9.62% guaranteed returns, which makes a lot of people think like, ooh, should I be investing in I bonds right now? And here's my opinion on it. Now, I guess I should rewind a second. I bonds, for those of you who don't know, are basically inflation bonds. So they are bonds that were created by the US government to essentially help you protect some portion of your money. $15,000 is the max per year of you can protect that money against inflation, essentially. So the reason that the I bonds right now are historically high is because we're having historic inflation highs over the last 40 years. So right now, you can buy up to $15,000 of I bonds from the US government, and you will get a guaranteed 9.62% return between now and November. So I believe the rates changed this month to 9.62%, which I'm recording this in July. But that sounds great. Like, who doesn't want a 10% guaranteed return? But here's why I'm not buying I bonds. With I bonds, you can really only use them for medium term savings goals. And what I mean by that is it's not a great place to park your emergency fund because your emergency fund needs to be as liquid as possible. I bonds are not particularly liquid. You've got to buy them from the US government and then you've got to cash them in. And if you cash them in early, then then you lose money on the interest rates. So generally, in order to get the most benefit out of I bonds, you want to be able to lock that money away for 1 to 5 years. Now, most things don't require us to lock our money away for 1 to 5 years. Instead, we're usually either needing that money to be liquid and in cash, like an emergency fund, or we are saving for the long-term investing goals. So really, I bonds can be used for those mid-term savings goals, like saving up to buy a car in the next 3 to 5 years, or saving up for a down payment on a home in the next 3 to 5 years. So that is generally why I'm not using them. I don't have any midterm savings goals. And then on top of it, what I also don't like about I bonds is you can only put $15,000 in. And that $15,000 is if you have $5,000 worth of tax returns, which I do not. So essentially, with I bonds, you can buy $10,000 outright from the US Treasury. You can buy those e bills or e bonds. And then with another $5,000 that came from your tax return, you can buy paper I bonds, which who's going to do that? Let's be honest. Who's going to buy paper I bonds? No one buys paper I bonds. So to me, just the hassle of having to purchase them and the lack of midterm savings goals that I have right now, they don't seem really that worth it to me. But the scenarios where I can see it working is if people have midterm savings goals. If you're planning on purchasing a house in a couple of years, if you're planning on purchasing a car in a couple of years, if you're saving up for a surgery that's happening in a couple of years, I can see I bonds working in those scenarios. So the other thing to note about I bonds is that 9.62% is only going to be around until November. So they change every quarter. So you're going to have that guaranteed return, but it's only going to be for a few months. Then it could go back down to 6.2%. It could go to 2.2%. But the average over the long term for returns on I bonds have been closer to 2.2%. So that 9.62%, it's probably not going to stick around. And I certainly wouldn't bet my future investments or long-term investments on a variable 9.62%. That's just my 2 cents. And the thing too is because I have no midterm savings goals, if I just happen to have like $10,000 laying around, I wouldn't be putting it in I bonds. I would be putting it into the stock market because I would like to buy stocks on sale right now. And that's a huge opportunity to buy during a bear market. So that's my take on I bonds. Let me know on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok if you disagree or what you're using your I bonds for. Like I said, in certain scenarios, it could make sense, but it's really for those midterm savings goals, not your emergency fund, not your retirement, really just things that you plan on using within the next 3 to 5 years. So I hope that helps. Let me know what questions you have. You can drop into my DMs on Instagram. But we'll go ahead and get into today's episode. I don't know if I've been more excited for an episode because this episode has my mom. I brought my mom on because she was actually one of the first people I thought of when I decided to do a podcast because I think it's so important to show what it's like to have an open and honest conversation between a daughter and a mom about money. Because so many of us need to talk to our parents about money. We need to figure out if they're on track for retirement. We need to know if there's any expectation that we need to help. We need to know like if they're doing okay. And we also just need to learn from them too if they have something to teach us, which whether they made mistakes or whether they did a good job, usually there is something to teach us. But having those open and honest conversations, I think is so important. And my mom is such a good example of how to do that because she's willing to listen. She's open. She's non-judgmental. She's gonna be honest. And she also like accepts areas where things didn't go right and they weren't the best. So I'm really, really excited to bring this to you guys today. So I'll stop rambling. But before I stop rambling and we get to the episode, just a friendly reminder that we rely on you to subscribe and rate and review us. So if you want this podcast to continue, please take a moment to just go rate, review, and subscribe. I even left myself a review. So if you need a template on what to say, just go look for the review by Clo Bare Money Coach. Totally unashamed. I'm not even embarrassed about that. We all got to support ourselves. So if you could take a second to do that, it helps me out a lot. It's free to you. It takes less than a minute. And I really appreciate it. And hit me up in my DMs to let me know that you did that so I can thank you personally. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get to the episode. All right. Welcome back to the Money Bear podcast. I have the most special guest on today. One that the first moment that I decided I was going to start a podcast, she's the first person I texted and was like, hey, would you want to be on my podcast? I'm starting a podcast. And she was like, I don't know. Because unlike me, I absolutely love being the center of attention and can't get enough attention. My mom, shockingly enough, who is our guest today, she is a little bit of an introvert. So first, we just got to give her a round of applause for joining today because I'm so proud of her for doing that. But also, like, I'm so excited to just have you on. So thank you for joining today because I think that a mother and a daughter talking about money is not something that you see a lot. And I love that you have always been open and able to have these tough conversations because I think that that is an anomaly. I think most people and most parents, especially in my coaching experience, do not like talking about money with their kids. And they certainly don't like telling or sharing about their mistakes or the things that they wish they had done differently. So I just want to applaud you for that and say thanks for coming on today.
You're welcome.
So my mom, also known as Kim Daniels, is on today, and we're going to talk a little bit about her money upbringing and her, journey through her own childhood and how money was like for her. And then we're going to also talk about my journey through growing up in the Daniels household and what my perspective was on money and what some of the mistakes they made and how they fixed those. So let's get to it. So, Mom, what was money like for you growing up in your household?
It was different. My dad was an accountant, and he came from a divorced family back when you didn't get divorces, and they didn't have a lot of money. So he really struggled with those issues. And for him, money was also love. So he was very, very frugal, very tight budget. He budgeted. Wanted so much spent on every category. He would go when he'd buy beer, he'd buy red, white, and blue beer, which I think is about the cheapest beer you can get.
I don't even think that exists anymore. That's cute.
And the problem was though, like when you wanted, like when they bring those flyers home from school and you wanted a book, and I loved books, you just couldn't have it. If you went to the store, you pretty much knew there was nothing extra. You were not going to get that. So I felt like even on the few vacations we took, it was such a tight hold on the money because it was his security that we didn't really get to enjoy life either. So it was a little too tight.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever have conversations with you about money or try to teach you anything about money?
Not really. He always said to pay yourself first. I didn't really know what that meant. The only thing that he explained was that your bills will always expand to meet your income. So you have to pay yourself first so that you can put that away in savings. But that was it. I never learned how to budget. I never knew about, how or why to do emergency funds. And your dad, in a way, was very similar too. They just never talked about money. So you kind of go out in the world and it's kind of like, okay.
What does it mean? Yeah, I love
Right?
that. I love that you mentioned the whole like hearing. I think so many of us have heard that phrase of like pay yourself first. And it's like, okay, but how do I do that? Like, what does that actually mean? And like realizing like, okay, Putting money in your 401k is paying yourself first. Treating your savings goals and your debt payoff goals and your investing goals is paying yourself first. And like prioritizing those as high as you would prioritize your bills is essentially what paying yourself first is. But it's like, it's such a like a vague statement. You're like, okay, but how do I pay myself first? What is that? So I love that you
Yes.
mentioned that. For you, growing up in a household where, things were a little tight, it sounds like it was like almost a self-imposed tightness,
It was.
not necessarily that you guys were struggling with money. It's just that he did not want to spend money. How do you think that impacted you and your perspective on money? Because like obviously our childhood impacts how we view things. So how do you think his kind of like ownership of the bills and not spending and being really, really frugal to the point where like you couldn't enjoy things like your vacations, how do you think that impacted you and your spending?
It's a good question. Yes, it was self-imposed because I know that he paid his house off by the time he was 40. Anytime that he would, get a nicer home, he was very uncomfortable having a mortgage. He did not like having bills. Um, I think it probably affected me the opposite way that it should have. I wanted to be able to live. I didn't want to go crazy. So I did have that, you need to live within your means mindset. But I definitely would do some retail therapy.
I was wondering if you were going to say that because like from the outside perspective looking in, I know how it impacted you because
Yeah,
I was like, but I wonder if you knew like how that would impact you. So it's so interesting
I
hearing
guess I would
that and
do it
like,
from a more frugal standpoint, but
yeah, right. Like, but it's so interesting, even in like the hundreds of people I've coached. Usually people either do exactly what their parents did or the complete opposite. There's never any like in between. And it's like if your parents were super frugal, either you become super frugal as well, or you do the exact opposite and you're like, I'm gonna spend any money that comes in because it's like I hated being frugal.
yes, yes. And
So
your dad always kind of made it like it's okay, it's just money, So it's like,
yeah,
oh.
yeah. So for you, kind of tell me like from a child up until like now, what has been your kind of patterns with money? Like when you were younger, you know me, like when I was a kid, my very first money memory, I don't know if I've ever told you this, is I don't remember when you guys started giving us allowance. Do you remember? It was
Hmm.
young. It was really young.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just wanted to make sure that you guys always had, a means to
Something.
get stuff that you wanted because
R-
I never felt that as a kid growing up, that I didn't
yeah.
have a means to get, like if I wanted a lip gloss, I didn't have the means to do that unless I went to work.
Right. And I'm pretty sure you started giving at least me and Corey, which for those who are listening, Corey's my older brother. We're about 18-ish months apart. He and I am pretty sure started getting an allowance even when we were in Colorado, I want to say, which would have been
I think
first
that's
grade.
right. Mhm.
Yeah, I think that was probably when we first started getting an allowance. But I remember you guys were really like, you guys can save this money and like save it up to, buy something really cool someday, or you can spend it.
But it
Sorry.
wasn't tied to any type of chores or anything like
Mhm.
this. This was your living money.
Right. And my earliest money memory, and this is something I'll ask you at the end of the show, my first money memory is me not being able to save those dollars. It was always like you would go to Kmart and I would tag right along with you and I would buy like those stupid little like, like wax like makeup kits that would be at like the end of the row for like $1. And I would buy those and they would be melted and disappeared within a day. And I remember Corey was really good. And even Max and Ethan were really good at saving their dollars so that they could eventually buy something really cool. And I specifically remember Corey like hoarding all his dollars to eventually buy some kind of like robot thing.
And him cutting out a coupon in the paper.
Yes, yes. And I, because of that, like from such an early age, what I internalized was, well, boys are good at saving money and girls like to spend money. Like it was something that from the very early age, I somehow internalized that it was a gender thing rather than, me just being a YOLOer and like wanting to just buy whatever.
Yeah.
So it's funny to like think back on that. But so for you, what were your behaviors with money from the time you started earning money or having access to money, and like kind of how did it change over the years?
I was gonna comment back, I don't know if you remember, but Max was also a mooch because he didn't wanna spend his money.
Yes, I do remember that. Max was always very frugal, and he still
Yes,
is. Like, what's
yes.
funny is, like, that
He'll get
hasn't
somebody else to
changed.
spend their money instead of his.
Right, and I think it's funny too because between all of the siblings, what we did as kids really didn't change all that much. Like,
Mhm,
even now as somebody who is financially literate and does have my finances together, I'm still a spender. I still like spending money. I'm not gonna be a frugal queen, like, that's not my vibe. My vibe is, like, I'm gonna make as much money as possible so I can spend as much as possible, whereas Max is like, I'm totally fine, making the money that I'm making for the rest of my life and being pretty frugal with it. Like,
mhm,
I think it's kind of interesting how those
yes.
personalities have really stayed the same.
Okay, back to your question. Well, when we did start getting allowance, it was tied to chores,
Mhm.
but it always turned into this game, where when it was time to get my allowance, it was my dad would say, "I'd rather owe it to you than beat you out of it." Or my mom would decide I didn't do my chores well enough.
Mm,
So she would dock it from me. So I
mhm,
just seemed like I never got that money. And it was very, very frustrating. Um, and my brother at one point when he was young, he got a little sticky fingers there for a while, kind of and would swipe a candy bar here or something like that, and he got in a little bit of trouble, straightened out, but, I always associated that to him not having access to things that he
mm,
wanted,
mhm.
and, that's what I didn't want you guys to ever be in that position. Everybody needs to have access to something they want, and they've just gotta learn to manage it. So I think for me, I started babysitting probably at 11 years, and my dad's at the rate and whatnot. I would save for a certain period of time, but usually I had to pay for my own activities. When I got a little bit older and I started working at a grocery store, they kind of expected me to buy the foods that I wanted or the clothes that I
Mm.
wanted. So there was never enough money left to really buy just the frivolous things that I wanted,
Fun stuff, right?
yeah, clothes or once in a while I could get some makeup or stuff like that. I remember I even bought my senior pictures, you know. It was a very different time, but that was, that's
How
the way it
old
was.
how old were you when they started, like, making you buy, like, the groceries that you wanted?
Probably around 14, 15, something like that. It wasn't really my dad. They got what they got, and they planned out their menu and whatnot. But my mom would always make a lot of things off limits to us, And
Mhm,
so if you wanted it, you had to go get it yourself.
mhm,
So instead of trying to fight and everything, that's what you did.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, probably 14. I think 15 is when I started at the grocery store. So
That's
probably about
really
that time.
That's really young.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, being 14, 15, and making money at the grocery store, IGA, if any of you guys have IGAs out
Mhm.
there, um, what was your approach to managing those dollars?
Well, again, it turned into a situation that I just never had enough because my dad, I think, in trying to force me to be a saver, but not really understanding it, started taking half of my paycheck to put it away for college, to help pay
Mm,
for tuition, that type of thing. Um, but I had to buy my own gas, basically
mhm.
pay for all my expenses. And I remember one of the dads, he actually got his son to quit working because he came at the grocery store and he's like, "How much do you work?" Because I was working 20 to 30 hours a week while I was in
Wow.
school. Yeah.
That's a
And
ton.
yes, yes. And then, I'd miss half my paycheck and it was this constant, I can never catch up. So it was frustrating.
Wow. So, from the time you were 15 or 14 or 15, like that scarcity mindset, it sounds like the scarcity mindset is deep rooted because your dad had a scarcity mindset of
Exactly,
like
exactly.
so it was like no matter what from the time you were a kid you picked up on that and then you were kind of forced into that when you started
Yes.
working at IGA.
And then we weren't really a family that could talk about things. We were kind of children are to be seen and not heard, and they didn't really want our opinions or our thoughts, what was going on. So you couldn't really express yourself or
Mhm.
explain why this isn't working,
Mhm.
why this is such a struggle for you. Um, so, um, yeah, I think that affected me growing up because I felt like I never could get the things that I wanted.
Mhm.
Um, I was still I never went crazy, but there were times where I definitely had some retail therapy,
Mhm.
and, but then I'd always feel bad about it afterwards, and it never really filled that hole.
Right.
So it was something that I learned to manage over time.
Mhm.
Um, like I said, for me, a retail therapy session would be loading up on books at Barnes and Noble.
Right.
But that also turned out to be one of my money mistakes because you buy a big stack of books, you come home and I buy some from you guys, and probably half of them would go out a year later selling them at a sale for 25 cents and thinking, man, half of those I didn't even read, maybe
Mhm.
three-fourths. I wish I had the money back for those. And
Right.
that always sat with me and bothered me.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. So for you, when you entered, so to give everyone some context, my mom and dad got married really young. They met when they were 16, I want to
Mhm.
say, and they got married when they were 20. So how did your money management approach change when you and dad got married?
Well, when we first got married, we were just basically on survival because we were 20. He was still in school. We decided that we wanted to go ahead and get married middle of his junior year. I had dropped out at that point because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I was just working with Kelly Services,
Mhm.
taking what jobs I could. And then the economy started driving up because I think there was a recession coming. And as soon as I turned 21, I became a cocktail waitress.
Mhm.
And boy, that didn't pay very well either.
Mhm.
I just remember he'd have to come in because they had free appetizers with drinks and stuff. So he'd get a fountain or, a beer on tap and just eat appetizers for dinner some nights.
Oh
So
my
again,
gosh.
we were just trying to survive. Once he graduated and we moved to the area, where we are now, um, I think we still tried to underspend, but I think we did so much like underspending in a way that we'd go crazy at times,
Right.
or like we'd go out to eat too much,
Right.
instead of
Because
making
you
a
like,
meal and planning it and had no
because
clue
you,
how to do that.
right, because it's like you're like restrict, 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 and then like
Yes,
binge, 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 and then restrict, restrict,
exactly.
restrict. It's so interesting to hear you say that because when I tell my money story and I explain kind of what my approach has been to money up until I learned how to use it, that was my approach. Is like I was really good at like eventually saving for a thing. So like I remember when I saved like $7,000 for that trip
Mhm.
to Spain, blew all of it on stupid shit that I don't even remember, like clothes and gifts that were like trinkets and like all this stuff. But like, it's because I didn't know how to manage my money. It was just like, I was just like walling out and not even thinking about what do I want to spend this money on? Like, what would actually
Yes,
give me like the true value? But it was like, I only had both extremes, either restrict, 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 and save as much as possible and have anxiety essentially the whole time, or spend, 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 and like forget that money even exists.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I definitely think I had a lot of that.
So look
Mhm.
at me just learning from you.
Yeah, good. That's what I wanted you to model.
No, but we learned and we are obviously in a good place now. So it's just interesting to hear that that was also your experience too, because like, yeah, of course, like thinking back on my childhood, I can see like that as a pattern as well. Like, because that's how it works when you restrict so hard. And that's what
Mhm.
made me realize is like, like ultimate restriction just for the sake of restriction really isn't helpful. What's
Yes.
helpful is really learning how to prioritize things and figure out what works best for you. So for you guys had 5 kids in 7 years, which is just
Mhm.
totally crazy. You started having
Mhm.
kids at what age?
24.
20. I cannot even
And I
imagine.
was in
That's
nursing school.
crazy. Holy crap. They are 24. They were poor. Dad was just starting out his career as an engineer. So it sounds like, so now we're getting into like when I existed. So
Mhm.
I want to kind of provide you my perspective on like how money was when I was growing up. And then I want to hear your perspective because I'm sure they're probably a little bit different. So when I was growing up, I remember very young, like there never feeling like there was enough at times. There were periods where we would like not have to worry or stress about money, but then there were periods when it was like, no, we really need to cut back. Like we're not going to be spending as much on, none of
Mhm.
the like life things. Like
Right. The
we always
extras.
exactly. We always had utilities covered. We never worried about paying mortgage. If you did worry about paying the mortgage, I certainly never knew about that. It was more just like what you said, like no buying books at the book fair this month, or like,
Right.
no eating out at your lunches, or, we're not going to be able to do as much with Christmas this year, or we're not going to, we didn't really go on family vacation all that much either. So it was
Mm-mm.
just kind of like, we lived in like the bougie part of a very blue collar area. Germantown
Mhm.
Hills was like the nice part. So a lot of my peers, they had so much. Like they
Mhm.
were always trips to Florida, trips abroad, insane Christmases, always new wardrobes for every season and things like that. So like we could see the difference between like our experience versus like all the rich kids that we went to school with. Um, but generally what I remember is, paying credit cards were like you cut them up at some point if I remember
Mhm.
correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
And but like it was a cycle. It was like
Mhm.
there were just certain times in my childhood where it was like, okay, this is the period where like we just don't have as much. And
Mhm.
to be fair, we still lived a privileged life, being able to always make sure that the utilities were covered, being sure that the mortgage, like we never had to worry about that, but
Mhm.
we didn't have the extra stuff. Is that
It
kind of
Nope, I think it's completely accurate. I mean, I took accounting and consumer ed in, high school, and,
mhm,
I definitely knew how to make sure I could pay the bills every month, but
mhm,
it was the extras, and it was the savings, and it was the investing,
mhm,
how to manage that in there too,
mhm.
that I didn't have a clue how to work all that together.
No,
It
but
was
you
just
got
surviving each month, I guess, but I knew those things would be covered, the
Y
basics.
yeah, and they always were, but I also think that, like, kinda how you experienced not being able to have granted, you experienced not being able to have anything you wanted really unless you could pay for it. We had allowance, but you also I don't know if you encouraged us to work, if that's the right word, but I knew that if I wanted to have what I wanted, I had to work, and it was
Yeah.
like, as soon as I could start making money, I started working, like,
I
I think
actually kinda hated you guys working because I didn't want you to miss out on everything like I did.
right, but I was so money driven even from a
Yeah.
really young age that it was like me and Sydney, who for those of you listening, Sydney's my sister, we're 4 years apart. We were both money hungry. And like money, we didn't save our money. It just burned a hole in our pocket, but like I started working in like concession stands when I was 9 and babysitting when I was 11 and getting a job at a coffee shop and then Barnes and Noble and things like that. For you, what do you remember about me and money growing up?
Well, I remember, like, during those times, you all of you kids, especially the girls though, were frustrated because all your friends, whenever they wanted money, they just asked for it, it'd be handed to them.
Mhm.
They'd go out, they could get movies anytime they wanted, they could go to their gas was completely paid for, they usually got not just a used car, but a new car, a nice
Mhm.
car. Um, and that was a frustration because you did get money, but it was a very limited amount compared to your friends, and you had to
Mhm.
budget it.
Mhm.
And probably like us, it was probably gone in the first week or two, especially with you girls.
Yep.
You'd already have it already, spent before you got it.
Right.
Um, so, but you were always one thing I will say about every one of you, you were all hard workers. If you wanted something, you'd go out and you'd work for it.
Mhm.
And we tried to support you. But you, I remember it was feast or famine. Like you said, Spain. I think you spent $1,000 a month there, and I was like, oh my gosh, she worked so hard for that
More!
money.
Mom, more. I was only there for 3.5 months. That means I spent an average of
Oh,
$2,000 a month
oh
to
my goodness.
on nothing. And what I remember too is like all the rich kids. So like I was there with tons of kids that were like from old money on the East Coast. They every single weekend were traveling to a new country, traveling to a new city, just like really living up the experience abroad like I wanted to. But I was so bad with managing that money, even though I
Hmm.
had probably saved more than most people had. I didn't go anywhere. I only went to a couple of places while I was abroad, whereas other people like went to dozens of places. I could have done that, but I didn't know how to manage my money and I just blew right on through it. And I remember literally feeling like so anxious because I just didn't know how to stop. Like I didn't
Hmm.
know how to like get control over it. It felt like this like almost inevitable thing that it was just gonna run right out of my pocket. Almost like binge eating, It was like
Yeah.
this thing I literally couldn't control just happening. And like that gave me so much anxiety. And it gave me anxiety
Aw.
even because the same thing happened in
Hmm.
China. Like when I was in China, Well, it's actually the opposite thing happened in China. In China, I had saved up like 10 grand to go to China. And that was more money than almost anybody I met. But I was so scared to lose it that I wouldn't go anywhere. I wouldn't
Yeah.
travel. I would just I would occasionally do it, and I would do it for as cheap as possible because I was so scared of replaying what happened in Spain because I still hadn't learned how to manage money. I was just
Yeah.
in those two modes.
Well, I remember sitting down with you because we got to budgeting during that time and, talking to you, this has to be livable, make sure you have
Mhm,
an entertainment fund, make sure you have this. But it was still so much less than what your friends spent,
mhm.
no matter what, because you're trying to balance all this. And of course, we had no idea the anxiety that was going along with that because you didn't have the tools that you have now. Now you're an expert at it.
Right.
Um, so it's wonderful to see how you went this direction, and you're teaching other people so they don't have to go through what you did, where I just tried to teach you kids,
Right.
but I don't think what we tried to teach you took that much effect because I think you forgot it pretty quickly.
Well, it was just the system worked for me when I lived at home.
Okay.
Because so to give everyone some perspective, when I got out of college, I moved back in with my parents because it was like right when we were recovering from a recession in 2012 and
Yes.
2013.
So because when you went to college was when it hit, your dad was getting furloughed, and yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yes.
And so really probably the worst time that you guys had with money I wasn't even at home for.
Hmm.
But anyway, so I got home from college, moved in with my parents, which again, want to recognize the privilege of even being able to move in with my parents. I know people who were kicked out after college and weren't allowed to move back. So definitely want to recognize that. But I remember obviously going through the depression and finally getting to a point where I even could manage money took a little bit of time, but I
Yeah.
got on that envelope system that you guys taught me. And the envelope system, for those of you who are listening and don't know about it, I believe Dave Ramsey is the founder of it.
He might, but I actually found it from a friend that her parents used to do
Okay.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
they
So
used to
it could
cash
be
their
it.
paychecks in every week, and they would put it all the little envelopes, and I thought, "You know what? That's pretty smart." So I didn't
Yeah.
even know of Dave Ramsey at the time.
And I don't know if if he found that method or if somebody else found it or not, but essentially the envelope method is exactly what my mom just described. For all of your bills that you can pay for in cash, you take out that money out of your paycheck, you put it into an envelope. So like you'll have a grocery envelope, you'll have a gas envelope, you'll have a entertainment envelope, etc. That way you're only spending cash rather than spending off of a card, which can be easier to just like blow through and not even realize how much money you're tracking, like spending. So I did that in 2013 when I was preparing to live in China. So that's what allowed me to save a crap ton of money in a really short period of time was doing the envelope method. But the only reason it worked is because I had 4 envelopes. I had almost no expenses. It was like I didn't have to pay for rent. I didn't have to pay for groceries. I just had to pay for like a couple of things that I wanted to, like gas and, you know, personal and entertainment. And sometimes I didn't even use those. So that you guys did help with and you did walk me through, but as soon as I got to China, I really could it didn't work anymore because
Yeah,
and I kept trying to make it work, but it never worked.
yeah,
And so eventually, like years later, I discovered zero-based budgeting, and that's when it really started working for me. But
yeah. And really, the
um
times have changed where I don't think that method works as well
yeah.
because then it was a physical thing where you could see it, and it's all digital now, and that to me that doesn't
Yeah,
work as well.
right. And some places don't even accept cash anymore.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So
You can't cash and go pay your power bill necessarily in person anymore.
right. And also who wants to do that? That's such a
Right.
pain in the butt.
So
Like
many people used to do that though.
yeah, no, what simpler times. No, for me, the reason now it's funny because it used to be like, yes, it's more painful to pay cash. For to me now, when I have cash, it's not real money. I'm like, if it's not on a card, it's not real money. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just spend this and I don't even track it because I'm like, it's not real, it's cash. Which isn't that funny though? Like
It's
how the
already zero balance, it's off,
yeah,
it's not in the
like
system.
it's not in my bank account. It never existed. um, so for you, would going back to
I
kind
guess I
of
did know Dave Ramsey though, because I think I searched for him after we started the envelope. Because didn't I give you guys for graduation a Dave Ramsey book and the
Millionaire Next Door?
yes.
Yes, you
Yes.
did. I never read the Dave Ramsey book, I will admit, which is
Yep.
funny because
I totally understand.
now I'm anti Dave Ramsey.
Yeah.
But I did read The Millionaire Next Door. It took me probably a decade before I finally actually read it, and it completely changed my perspective on what it means to build wealth and what it takes to become a millionaire. And it was like, oh, this is actually achievable. Like people in the book were making less money than what I was making, and I was like, oh, this is it started like the wheels actually turning.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that did actually end up probably inspiring me to become Clo Bare Money Coach.
Well, it's 10 years down the road, so I don't think I can take credit for that.
I think you can take a little bit of credit. I was like, oh, there's this book sitting in my closet forever. I should probably read it. But anyway, so kind of going back to like me as a kid and like
Yes.
you witnessing kind of my money behaviors, is there anything that stood out to you about my money behaviors as like a young adult child?
As a child, no, just that you were gonna spend it as quick as it came in, you know? You always had something, whether it was going to get ice cream or, or
Candy.
yeah, whatever it was, and it may be sometimes it was birthday parties because included in that monthly amount, if you guys wanted to go to birthday parties, you had to manage to get a gift, you
Yeah.
know? So, we'd hope that it would kinda teach this managing thing. I don't think it did, but, at least you guys had something.
Well, and you never know what would have happened had we not been given that,
Yeah, it's true.
like so it's one of those things. Um, and then when I was like in college and in China and things like that, anything stand out to you?
Well, I wondered when you had like, when you said you went to Spain and you were spending that much money, did you find that you were during those times when you were out with your friends, were you more generous and more giving of your money?
Oh, for
I
sure.
I
But
see
I
that
was
with people.
yeah, but I also was so frivolous with it. I remember yes, there was definitely like me buying drinks for people and stuff like that. I still like doing that. But I remember this one store that was basically like a Spanish Forever 21. And almost every day I went into that store just to see if there was something I wanted to buy. Almost every single day. I probably
Yeah,
spent 2,000 euros just on that stupid store. I don't have any of the clothes anymore, but it was just
yeah,
like, I think it's kind of like what you said. I just wanted something that would like fill this hole that I didn't know
yeah.
why it existed.
And
And
I was just gonna say, I think I did notice, especially when you're older, that it became like a retail therapy thing that,
oh
that
yeah,
you were just trying to weren't necessarily happy with your life at that moment. You were trying to feel a little better, and it lasted for
right,
a few minutes.
right. And then I'd panic and be like, how am I going to pay for rent? So yeah, um, would this is a side note.
Yeah.
Would you have ever guessed I would be doing what I'm doing now?
No. 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 Back then, I remember, especially with the anxiety that you were having at the time,
Hmm.
I wasn't sure that you'd ever be able to hold down a full-time job. And to go from where you went and how well you did and how successful and how you managed things and all the office dynamics and then going on and starting your own business and having tough skin with the whole social media world. Wow, I never saw that coming.
Wow, I've never heard you say that before of the like, I didn't know if you were going to be able to hold down a full-time job.
I thought the stress would be too much.
Well, honestly, looking back to who I was in 2012 and 2013, I would have wondered the same thing. And in fact, I think I did wonder like how I remember just being like, how do people do it? How do people like manage all of these different things? But honestly, I think me going and getting that shitty job at Welch ATM honestly saved me in a lot of ways because
Interesting.
going and getting, and then there are multiple factors,
Yeah.
but going and getting a job that I hated and still figuring out how to do it and figuring out how to also like I don't know if I would say I thrived there, but in comparison to what I had been doing just 6 months before I got that job, it was a huge shift of like sleeping 16 hours a day, binge eating
Yes.
all of the time, being so unhappy to like just being able to hold down a job, being able to like go into work every day, have a schedule, have a routine. Like and learn how to prioritize. Like that job, even though I hated it and it was one of the worst jobs I've ever had, it taught me so much about just like being a human in corporate America. Like, and it's stuff like that that I think a lot of us just don't even realize could change your life. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
it seems so unsexy and gross on the outside of like, who wants to work as an account manager at Welch ATM? Well, you never know what it could lead you to. And here I am today. It obviously all worked out.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah, that's wild to think about because I think that when the people who have been, following Clo Bare Money Coach for a long time hear that, they'll be surprised.
Well, and I remember you were so miserable there because it sounded like it was a pretty toxic
So it
environment.
was so bad. It was so bad.
I remember writing you that letter and saying, "You're miserable.
Mhm. Get
Now's the
out.
time you can take a chance. Get out, do something, go overseas, teach English, whatever. Just go do something different. You'll be
And
okay."
and that is when my mom essentially, so I was just talking about this with my spiritual coach earlier today. Sometimes we need permission. And like you basically gave me permission to be like, screw this, I'm gonna go teach English in China. And trying to change my life too. I mean, I've had lots of things that have been life changing, but yeah, it's like that.
It
But
was like giving you permission to give up basketball.
same. Yes, it really was. It was like
Yeah.
that moment of being like, hey, I want to be a theater kid. I don't want to play basketball anymore. I was talking to somebody about that the other day. Dalianne, she was like, you seem like you did sports in high school. And I was like, shockingly enough, let me tell you about my experience of sports.
And you
I
worked so hard.
worked so hard and like I may not have been the worst, but I was nowhere close to the best or even good. Like I was not the worst. That's what I can say about my sports
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so wild to see how things can change. Because
Yeah.
I certainly would have never guessed. I think I always imagined myself being in a spotlight somehow, not
Mhm.
sure what that was going to be. I had you told 2018 Chloe that this would be what I was doing now, I'd be like, personal
Right.
finance?
I
Like,
remember those
what?
emails from China. "Mom, I'm an English major. What am I gonna do with my life? Nobody's gonna hire me."
Literally, like every other day, I'd be talking about
Yeah.
that. I remember constantly focusing on like, I am useless. Like,
Mhm.
I remember crying on the floor in the restroom when dad was working on the restroom the 10 days that I was home from China and asking him, what were you doing when you were 22 years old or 23 years old? And he's like, I was preparing for my first child. And like just getting that perspective of like, you know, you don't know what's going to happen and like you just have to figure it out and like take the next step and like you'll figure it out as you go, but no one knows what they're doing at any point in their
Yeah.
life, really.
Yeah. And
So
you were definitely a people pleaser. You didn't wanna disappoint, and it was like, "It's okay," you know?
yeah, yeah. So if you're listening to this and you feel like you're in your 20s or even your 30s and you're like, I have made all the wrong decisions and there's no coming back from this, I have felt that too. I have been there too, but it's just like, just take the next best step. And if you don't know what that is, just try something. Move to China. Just kidding on that one.
Find you, do
Yeah.
you.
Yes, yeah, just figure out what that is and whatever feels right. Because yes, I could have never predicted
Mm-mm.
this life that I
And
have
from that
now.
point on, I mean, it was all you.
Yeah, yeah, which is
Mhm,
crazy. It's so
mhm,
crazy.
and that's when you really started to fly.
Yeah, who knew corporate America would give me so much confidence to become who I was always supposed to be.
And we were panicked because you were moving to Chicago and you were a quote unquote administrative assistant, but not really. But
Mhm,
it still was a limited budget and just
mhm,
literally again getting down to the nitty gritty. Can I afford to move there? How can I make this happen? And
mhm.
boy, I just remember telling you about a year or two later, Chloe, people don't usually get this many raises. You're
Yeah.
doing great.
Oh, yeah, no, I distinctly remember us sitting at the kitchen table before I had moved there. I'd gotten my offer. It was $42,000 a year, and we estimated what that would be on a monthly basis, and we sat down and we wrote out my budget, and I was like, "Dad, I don't have any money left over to save." And he goes, "Well, technically, the entertainment budget's optional, the personal budget's optional, like, there is money in here if you needed it." Like, and I was like, okay. And he's like, that's more money than some people have. It was like an extra like $200 or something. He was like,
Yes, it
that's
was
more.
tight.
He's like, that's more money than most people have. And then what did my dumbass do? less than 6 months into my job, I went and I bought a new car that ate up that $200 extra a month. In fact, it put me in the hole for
And then
150.
insurance.
Yes, yes, yes. And so it was just like one bad move after the next. But it all worked out.
Yeah.
So, okay. So a couple more questions for you. What would you say, like, top 3 biggest money mistakes that you and dad made?
Oh, top 3. Boy, that okay. I wrote
Mhm.
just a whole bunch of lists listing them
Did
all
you?
out. Yes. Well, you had already mentioned we had gotten into credit card debt, and I think that started pretty young while he was still in college. That, you know, I remember I had a friend that her brother had died, and I was going to her funeral. I had nothing to wear.
Mhm,
And when I changed jobs to an office job, it was like I had nothing to wear.
mhm,
So I had to, I mean, I went to the used clothing stores, everything, trying to be frugal to find stuff. I found what I could, but I'd have to use a credit card
mhm,
to manage the best, you know. And when it's just, you know, you start a couple hundred, your payment's only
mhm,
25 or 50, whatever the minimum is, you know. So it was like, okay, we can do this.
mhm,
Um, so eventually over the years that habit continued, and of course the balance grew.
mhm,
Um, that we I mean, I think we kept them manageable for a fair amount of time, but it got to a point where we needed to refinance. You know,
mhm,
we had a house, we needed to get rid of that debt and try to
mhm.
start clean, because it just kind of drowns you. You know, you're
Yeah.
putting that money out every month trying to pay it off. And so we refinanced our house and took money out to pay off the credit cards. And
Mhm,
then we didn't do it just once, we did it twice, because we
mm,
did it later, but that was more, it was still essentially credit cards, but we had the house on Menard and
mhm,
done so much remodeling to it that that was on the credit cards.
mm.
So that was by far the number one, because our house would have been paid off, you know, by now if we
Yeah,
had never done that and taken the equity out of it. The
yeah.
second one, which
Well,
is
wait, so would you say that the reason that that's a mistake is because you wish the house was paid off now as you guys are, like, approaching retirement?
it would be nice. It would be nice to be free of that payment, you
Yeah.
know, and just to know that we should be further ahead than we were.
Mhm,
And because it wasn't until the Great Recession that we really sat down and said, "Shit, we need to do better. You know, we need to
mhm,
figure this out. We don't want credit card debt. We don't want anything but our mortgage." You know,
mhm. Yeah.
and you know, at that point, you know, your dad was being furloughed. I think I had just left a job, and then I had to go back to work because of the recession and the furloughs.
Mhm,
And, you know, I never got a chance to stay home with you kids really, and it was very frustrating. So at that point, we just started buckling down, you know, we started changing, like, our grocery shopping. We started shopping at Aldi's, you know.
mhm,
My old boss always said it was the German import store, and he'd owned grocery stores, and he said it's the same food. It's just wrapped
mhm,
differently.
mhm.
And I think that habit is stuck, and in fact, it's stuck with most of you kids.
Oh,
But
we all love Aldi now. Aldi's trendy now.
oh my gosh, we cut our grocery bill in half, you
Yeah.
know, doing that. It was pretty amazing. And your dad was much better about sticking to a list than I ever was.
He's so good at it now. Like, I asked him when he came out to Arizona, I go, "How much has your grocery bill gone up?" And he's like, he's like, "Every week's a little bit different, so it's not like exact." He's like, "It's probably gone up like $50 per trip." And I was like, "That's really nothing in comparison to like what it could be." I'm like, "He's so good at like." And also, he goes to all the stores to get the best
Mhm.
deal on certain items, which I'm like,
Yes,
I think he enjoys it
he does.
because I would never do that. I'd be like, I don't care if it saves me $6 going here versus here. Like, I'm just gonna go to one place. You will not see me bopping around multiple places.
Yes.
Um,
And he's very good about at it, you know, and I think it makes him feel good, you know. And the man can completely afford to go to a nice
right.
department store, but he still to this day will check out Goodwill first in a nice town and comes home
Yeah.
with all this stuff, you know. I mean, not tons, but just what he needs, and you know, name brand shoes and
Yeah.
pants. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, oh boy.
Okay, so that was your first mistake, was the credit card debt and
Yes.
using the home to refinance. What would you say? And my other question would be, would you have said that refinancing your home one time to pay off your credit card debt would have been better or okay? Or would you just say all in all, you just wish that you had never gotten into credit card debt?
I think the doing it for the remodeling would have been okay, but I
Okay.
think one time would have been enough. I wish we had never gotten into the credit card trap because
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's a trap, and then your
Yeah.
interest rates go up. And when we in our generation, I don't know if you see it as much anymore. You come out in the world, and we had nothing, and our parents gave us a few hand me downs, but we didn't have furniture. We didn't have that kind of help, and it's like, "Oh, we need a family room set,"
Yeah, yeah.
"Hey, come finance it," it's only a first year interest free, and then it's,
Right.
$125 a month, and you're thinking, "Oh, well, that's not gonna stress our budget." We're not thinking of the whole amount saying, "Well, I can't afford that right now,"
Mhm.
and so it was a debtor's mentality is what I
Yeah.
realized over the years, and, that's the one thing I would never do again, never
Yeah.
get store credit cards, I never do any of that. And, I
Yeah.
mean, there's nothing wrong with a store credit card if you do someplace you use all the time and you pay it in full every month and you get the
Mhm.
benefits from it.
Right.
But yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was a big thing. That was kinda added to the credit card thing.
I forgot, like, you're right, you guys really did finance most big purchases now that I think
Mhm,
about it. Because as I'm 31 now, and I've never financed anything, and I wouldn't
mhm,
even think about financing, like, furniture or something along those lines, but I feel like it used to be so normal, or
mhm.
maybe it's just because I'm so out of the space now where I'm like, "I would never do that." I'm sure people still do that a lot.
And you'd probably do it a lot more frequently than you would
Yeah.
if you were gonna pay for it all up front, which is why I would never do it again, because
Right. Because
it's so much easier that way.
right, and you're only gonna buy the thing you can afford.
Right. Right, you're gonna think, "Yeah, do I really need that extra feature? No."
No, because it's all coming out all at once. I was thinking about even my couches when I finally moved out on my own. I was like, yeah, I paid for all of those in cash. Granted, I had the privilege of being able to pay for all of that in cash, but I don't think financing would have ever been something I would have thought of. So thank you
Mhm.
for that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things sometimes you realize, "Yeah, I can live with that for another year." Saves me the
Yeah.
money. That's much more time that I don't have to buy something new.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So what
So
do you think was biggest mistake number two?
well, I will say that kinda goes along with it. To a lesser amount, we took some 401(k) loans, I think trying to get that credit card debt down, but we were
Mm,
still so caught up in the trap that it just got us further in the hole. So I would
mm,
never have done that. It's not a bad thing for certain things, especially if it's a home improvement or this and that
right.
you're going to get value from more value in the long run.
Right.
But that was both of those. We would have had a bigger balance, it would have grown faster over time.
Did you guys
So
end up paying back the loan to your 401k?
mhm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have any anymore.
Yeah, it's wild how much people don't realize, like, when you take that money out, you're missing out on all the future growth, and it takes years to pay it
And
back.
you're paying interest on your own money.
Right, right. But granted, the interest goes into your account, right?
I thought with the loan part of it, they keep that interest.
Did they? Interesting. I think it
I might be wrong, but I think because it's essentially a loan from that money,
yeah,
yeah, you're paying that interest to the company that lends you the money.
not to yourself.
Right, right.
Wow, I'm gonna have to Google that to fact check
Yes,
myself because
because 'cause
that's
I'm not
wild.
positive. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I've heard that the interest actually goes back to you, but it could be plan dependent as well. It could
Yeah,
be like this one company will do that where you don't have to pay interest and then others you pay yourself interest. So I'll have to do a Google deep
yeah.
dive on that.
We
Um,
had started, mutual funds for, like, you and Corey, and that's something I had wanted to keep growing as you guys were little, but it's just soon became unaffordable, with 5 of you and then with the credit card debt, and had we not had that, I think we would have just had a much easier time and
mhm.
a nicer time. We would have it just would have been better for everybody. Just been a
Yeah,
healthier environment.
for sure. So what would you say was your third biggest mistake?
The 3rd biggest, let me look at my list here.
Like exercise equipment?
Oh
And
my gosh, books and exercise equipment, that is definitely one. I was saying when we refinanced the house a second time for the remodeling, unfortunately, because your dad got the offer in Colorado, we went ahead and moved, but we didn't have the time to capitalize because we had really made
Mm,
nice changes. we basically walked away with about $1,000 from our house, which we'd had a lot of money in there. And it was because it didn't have time to appreciate. And it's just like, oh, that was a mistake. But
Well,
um,
especially now being Colorado, like that house is probably worth almost $1 million now.
oh, the house in Colorado now, we bought that, I think, for just under 200,000. And I just looked it up like about 6 months ago because they had the fires out there, 765,000 now. It was like, oh,
You're like,
but
if it would have,
we were
it would have
packed
been
in there though.
right. It would have been so great though if you could have like kept that property while still moving back to Illinois and like just used it as a rental property. But like that's just like not everybody has that option, you know, you
Well,
needed that money.
we didn't even think about that money because we really didn't walk away with much. And we rented it out. We
Right.
probably could have made enough for that and any maintenance over the years, but it was just stuff
Mm-hmm.
that we weren't educated as much
Right.
then, about this kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
no, I would definitely say I told you about the books and the exercise equipment. Like I said, I think I had over the years probably 4 treadmills, a couple spinning bikes. We've had free weights. We've had
Bowflexes,
the
Pilates machines,
we had
spins
one of
bikes.
those. What are those modules called? Where there's like an exercise on each side of it.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah,
The
we had one of those, and
literally any like piece of equipment that was ever on an infomercial, we
yeah,
had.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's another thing is in the early years, infomercials were a big that affected your dad more than me because I remember
Yeah.
once he got in the middle of the night he ended up purchasing How to Be a Children's Writer. Never finished it, of course. And then shortly after that, it was some get rich scheme, and he told me about it the next morning, and I made him immediately cancel.
It's so funny
So
because I cannot even imagine him doing that
it's
now.
before he was frugal, and
Yeah.
that's when he was trading his car in every 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years, and he got to the point where he had upside down loan, and that was one of the few times that I said no more. That's and for the kids' cars, when we started buying kids' cars, it was like, okay, we'll still buy the car, but a mechanic has to check it out because like
Mhm.
Sydney's car, I think that thing lasted 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. No, we
Oh,
got lucky with the Ford Aspire. That one
oh my
lasted forever.
goodness, that thing's still going, I think.
Probably, yeah. For those of you guys who don't know what a Ford Aspire is, I encourage you to look one up. It's been in a book called 500 Worst Cars Ever Made, and it basically looks like a car that aspires to be a Geo, which weren't great cars anyway. And the funny, it's like called Aspire, but that thing it lasted forever, and
Ever. And all
even when
three of you guys in there going to high school?
oh yeah, and I don't know if I ever told you this, I used to take it off roading.
No, you didn't.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
yeah, when I was like a senior, my friend had like this like off-roading course essentially in her yard. Sam Durr, she's got that
Mhm.
huge piece of property back there, and we would just drive the Ford
Oh,
Aspire through it.
I think I've
And like
seen that course.
yes, and I'm like now I'm like, oh my God, I was such an idiot because I would never do that with my car now. But like I was just like, this is great. Like it was hilarious. But luckily it made it through that
Yeah,
too.
it was one of those cars that I couldn't believe it, but it lasted and
It
lasted.
lasted.
Well, let me look here real quick on my list, see if there's anything else. I definitely had the purchasing books because that yeah, there was so much money wasted with that. Um,
Mama Bear needed to find a library card real
yes,
bad.
yes. So I think we talked about all of that. Yeah, and just basically we changed our ways once we started the Great Recession. I mean, that was a huge wake up call and learning
Mhm.
lesson. And I never wanted to be in that position again, ever,
Yeah.
you know. And I know my stress, because your dad never shows stress, came across to you kids. No matter how much I tried not to talk about it or anything like that, it was very stressful.
It's hard. I mean, money controls everything, and when you don't have it, it ruins everything,
Yeah,
It's impossible to live a life of peace and stress-free when money is an issue. So, it's one of those things, it's of harsh truths, I would say.
yes.
So, in 2008, would you say that's when dad became frugal?
I would say it was before that, but that's when he really went frugal. That's when he went supersonic frugal.
Supersonic frugal.
You remember Corey calling him part of the trifecta of the three frugal men?
That's so funny. I did not
Yeah,
know that. That's
yeah,
funny. Wild.
yeah.
All right. Well, I have one final question for
Okay.
you, and it's a fun question. What is your very first money memory?
Oh, wow.
Mine is that one that I told you earlier about like me not being able to save my dollar.
I think it literally is, um and I think I was pretty little. I think for birthdays and stuff like that, my grandmother would give me $1 or sometimes, I'd get an allowance or just something. And I saved those for quite a few years. Oh, actually, I have 2 of them. And I remember going and buying my mom a Christmas present with it.
Oh,
So,
that's
the
so
other one
sweet.
was I had a little piggy bank. Oh, that I didn't save it, piggy bank, but I learned how to get in the piggy bank, and I went to the little candy store, and I got caught. My
Oh
dad
my
saw me coming out with a little bag of candy, and I was so excited because it was the first time I ever did that. Boy, was I in trouble.
God, how old were you?
Oh, I think I was only, like, 2nd grade, and it was, like, on the block behind us.
Took your whole piggy bank?
No, I just took out as much as I thought I could get away with.
It's adorable. And
Counted
do
up
you
all the little quarters and the pennies and stuff to get little candy and had a little
that
bag with my
is
friend, and as soon as I walk out the store, there's my dad.
oh my God, that's adorable. Do you remember what you bought your mom?
Uh, there was 2 different I know once I got her because her punch bowl set had broken, and I bought her one, and, of course, I didn't have much money, so it was a cheap one, and so I like it, but, the other time, gosh, no, I don't remember what it was. That's because I was still in Monmouth when I bought her that, so I don't
It's so
remember.
sweet. Like,
So
it just makes me think of like, because I know how your mom was. I know she wasn't very loving and she wasn't a very nice person. And it's really heartbreaking to hear about like a little girl buying her mom, like using her allowance to buy her very not nice mom a little present. And then when you said she didn't really like it, I like was like crushed.
oh,
That's so mean.
it was ugly, but when I look back at it, but
God.
it's I didn't have
Because
very much money,
do you
so,
remember how old you were? I can't remember if you said how old you were when you bought the Christmas present for your mom.
I think I was gosh, it would have been 2nd or 3rd grade. So, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, she should
And it
have
took me a really
loved
long
the
to
punch.
save up that kind of money, because I didn't have money,
Oh,
so
it's so sweet. It's one of those things too, like as a people pleaser, and like, I know Sydney and I both did this when we were little kids. We always felt like we should buy things for people for them to like us. And
yeah.
like, it sounds like you did that a little bit with your mom.
I think so, and, hers broke, I wanted to fix it, so I didn't break it, but I don't remember what happened, but it
Yeah,
just
that's
yeah,
so
yeah.
sweet. Oh my God, that's precious. Well, that just makes me wanna give you a hug.
Aw.
My mom's in Illinois, so I'm in California. I won't see you for a couple of months, but thank you so much for coming on today. This was really fun, and I learned stuff about you I didn't know. Did everyone just hear that evil laugh? She goes, all right. Well, I love you, and thank you for joining today.
I love you too, honey.
All right, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. Like, it was so fun interviewing my mom, and like, there were things about her I didn't even know. So it was like so fun to just hear about her journey, hear even more about her parents. My mom did not have the greatest childhood. Her parents were, and we didn't talk about this in the podcast because, I don't want to make her go through that. But, she didn't have a great upbringing. Her parents were kind of abusive, and I'm sure you could probably pick up on that from the conversations that we had. But like, the story of her buying her mom a Christmas gift when she was like 7 years old and like saving up her allowance to do that just tore me to pieces on the inside because I know her mom and I know some of the horrible things that her mom has done to her. And I'm just like, oh, I just want to go hug my mom and be like, you are loved. I love this punch bowl. Don't care if it's ugly. It's so sweet. So I wish everyone could have those kind of conversations with their parents. And I know I'm really blessed to have a mom who is willing to have these really open and honest conversations with me. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. As a reminder, this is a Money Bear podcast. So we're talking about money. Nothing on this podcast episode is meant to be construed as financial advice. So please always do your own research. And if you're looking for advice on your own situation, seek out the help of a professional. And of course, if you guys are trying to get your money right, if you are starting out and you're ready to get going, please go to the show notes and download my free money guide. It is a 20 plus, actually, I think we're at 30 plus pages now of free resources, free templates, free education on pretty much all the frequently asked questions that I get as a money coach. So check that out. It's again totally free. So link in the show notes. And I've also got a free investing class coming up this month as well. A link to that is down in the show notes as well. But as always, if you made it this far and you enjoyed listening, please do us a huge favor and rate, review, and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. And if you do it, let me know and I will thank you personally. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.